Hello, my name is Renee Johnson, and today's virtual roundtable is hosted by Reimagine Main Street during the 2020 Afrotech Conference. The goal of this panel is to discuss priorities for Black small business owners in tech post-election. We are truly excited to host a multi-stakeholder, cross-sector initiative focused on advancing and uplifting and innovative solutions to ensure the Main Street is at the center of our recovery. I'm also excited that we are hosting this stellar panel. I'm honored to introduce our moderator for today, DeShuna Spencer. She's the founder and CEO of KweliTV, a video streaming platform that celebrates global Black stories through curated indie films, documentaries, kids programming, and more. Thanks, DeShuna.
Renee, thank you so much for having me today. Today's session will focus on policy proposals that advance the interests of Black business owners and entrepreneurs and include a call to action for entrepreneurs to engage in advocacy. Our panelists are from a variety of fields intersecting with small businesses who believe that strengthening Black business owners in the tech industry should be a priority no matter who is president. So let me introduce our panel. Ron Busby Sr. is the president and CEO of the US Black Chambers. Binta Niambi Brown is the founder and CEO of Omalilly. She's a founder and CEO of Omalilly Projects and founder and co-head of Black Music Action Coalition. Marcus Knight is the Chief Growth Officer of Black with No Chaser. And Adrienne Trimble is the President and CEO of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
So before we really get started with the conversation, I first want you to formally introduce yourselves and then answer this question. What are your thoughts on the election, how it would generally impact Black small business owners?
My name is Ron Busby. I'm the president and CEO of the US Black Chamber. We represent 145 Black chambers located in 42 states, including Canada, and 6 countries in Africa with a membership base of over 300,000 Black-owned businesses. Thank you for having us this afternoon.
Adrienne? You can go next.
Thank you so much. Again, Adrienne Trimble, President and CEO of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. Our mission is to connect corporate America with certified minority businesses, advocate on their behalf, and ensure that we have development processes and programs in place to help them grow capacity and capability. And we are just waiting to understand, it doesn't matter who actually is sitting in the White House, our job is to make sure there are policies in place to help support the growth and sustainment of minority businesses. So we're glad to be here and a part of this discussion today.
Binta Niambi Brown.
Hi, good afternoon, Binta Brown. I am founder and CEO of Omalilly Projects, a management and production company in the entertainment business, and also co-founder and co-president of the Black Music Action Coalition, which is an advocacy group that brings together 200 plus of the leading artists, engineers, entrepreneurs, managers, and other folks in the music business. All of us are small business owners, and so this conversation is extremely relevant, notwithstanding that it's business, notwithstanding that it's the culture industries, it's extremely relevant given the number of us who are working in entertainment as entrepreneurs.
And last but not least, Marcus.
Marcus Knight, he, him pronouns, Chief Growth Officer, Black with No Chaser, which is a Black-owned media outlet and digital consultancy company focusing on Black culture and really with an emphasis on social activism, helping small Black business owners scale their efforts through revenue, and just really a place for all things Black.
So I'm gonna go back to my first question. I know that this is pre-recorded and we're still waiting for the results of the election, but what are your thoughts about the election and how it would generally impact small Black business owners? Whoever want to go first, Ron?
I'll go first, and thank you for the question. And as we are still in the process of the election, I just want to tell folk, I think it has played out in the way Americans have participated. It's the largest number of voters that we've ever seen, both from the Republican as well as the Democratic side. So I believe that, one, it has galvanized America to really have a voice in our new leadership of the country. I think right now the country is so polarized that we need true leadership that encompasses all of our voices, all of our concerns, as well as issues that we can move forward. And that's why I think having organizations like the National Minority Supplier Development Council and the U.S. Black Chamber on this call is extremely important, because although we are going to talk specifically about the technology sector, I think you got to really look at this from a broader perspective and what is happening with Black-owned businesses and how can we move that agenda forward. I don't want us to get caught up into, hey, this is a Republican or a Democratic issue, a male versus female issue, an older versus younger issue. This is a moment in time where Black issues are at the cornerstone between a civil rights conversation and an economic conversation. And I think the people that you have on this panel this afternoon really can discuss not just policies, but personalities. Over the last 4 years, we've seen this country be led by a personality. I hope that what we'll see in the future is a country that will really be led by policy, because policy is really what is going to drive the change for Black-owned businesses as well as tech businesses.
Binta, do you want to take the next? Want to go next?
Sure. In my own introduction, I left out that, a lot of my background before I went into the music business is advising startup companies, advising tech companies, and acting as an angel investor and an advisor to a lot of startup capital. So, as I think about the election, first of all, I'm optimistic and I'm confident that the outcome is going to be one that is favorable to the policies and to the initiatives that are most important to me as a Black business owner and just as an American. But again, regardless of who ends up prevailing, do I believe that the Biden campaign has a better package? Yes, I do. We're no longer campaigning though, so we're not talking about that. Regardless of who ends up prevailing, we have our work cut out for us. I think that, should it be the case that the current president is actually reelected, my expectation is that those of us who are in this community are going to have to work together very, very closely to continue to affect change. That we're going to have to continue to find as many ways as we possibly can to stand with one another. And that's the case, quite frankly, if Biden is elected. Because even there, it doesn't stop with the election. It stops with everything that we do, in the weeks and months and years ahead, which is that we can't get complacent. There have been too many times, I think, in the past where, for whatever reason, and I think that this is something that especially affects us as Black business owners. We're so busy running our businesses and fighting for our families that sometimes it can become very, very difficult to take on this additional burden of being very active in the policy side. But I think that we are obligated to do that, to understand what's out there and to make sure that we're getting the tools that we need, because there are truly and genuinely gross inequities, particularly when it comes to Black business in terms of access to capital, in terms of technical assistance. We know what all of the issues are. There are true inequities and we need to be able to figure out a way to correct that. One other thing though, is that as much as this is about policy, it's not only about policy. There are so many pools of private capital that are going into tech startups and other startups. And women and Black folks are not getting those pools of capital. And so there needs to be another mechanism perhaps that enables us to continue to press the case, because it's not just that we're not getting that capital. We don't typically come from the kind of generational wealth and or the families who have the ability to invest in and to support us while we're building our own businesses. Yes, a lot of us figure it out. We hustle and we get it done. But we're going to have a broader conversation about how private capital is being invested, which is not necessarily, is there a policy intervention? Sure. But even before we get to that policy intervention, we do need to have a deep change of heart, because even there with a policy intervention, the last thing we want is people feeling like they're being told how to spend their money. So we need people to understand the consequences of not investing their money in Black-owned businesses, which are such a key and important part of our economy.
Thank you for that. Right, you, Marcus?
Yes, so I think that even going up to the election, we've seen somewhat of an awakening when it comes to Black business owners and the ability to collaborate with one another right now. I think it's just the beginning, but I'm seeing more Black business owners reaching out to other folks who's saying like, hey, we can actually join forces and push initiatives along. I'm also seeing just like the upliftment of each other's businesses, which is great. I think that we need to do so much more of that, no matter who is in office or at the helm, if you will. And also just understanding that like Binta said, that like we don't have access to the capital from a private equity standpoint. And so we need to pull our resources together as one to do that. And then also just create ways in which Black business owners know that there are funds out there for them. So that's one of the things that I do quite often is just make the connections to angel investors for these ideas that Black business owners have. Also, I will help and consult with them on their revenue strategy, which is the most important piece. And if you're trying to scale the business up. So there's a number of different things that we can do together, but ultimately it's continuing to double down on collaborative joint efforts to push our initiatives forward.
Adrienne.
Sure, as I mentioned in my opening statement, that now that we are waiting for the outcome of this election, it doesn't really necessarily depend on who is sitting in the seat of the President of the United States. It really is about what we can do as a collective community to ensure that our businesses get the resources, support, and sustainability that's necessary to contribute to the overall U.S. economy. These last few months have shown us that Black businesses are the most vulnerable in the small business sector. And I think that all of our policymakers and politicians understand that, but the time has passed for us to keep talking about this, and we need specific actions around what is going to be done to provide the infrastructure necessary so that our businesses can be sufficient, sustainable, and be able to, again, contribute to the overall U.S. economy. So as we start thinking about what this looks like going into 2021, we need parties from both sides of the aisle working together to ensure that minority businesses are at the forefront of legislation, policies, or practices that is going to help restart our economy and making sure that they get those resources that are necessary. Because frankly speaking, we cannot have a repeat of what's happened in 2020 when Black businesses were the ones that were probably the most forgotten as it relates to resources and support that was needed.
And Adrienne, you mentioned the last few months. Of course, the pandemic is still ravaging the world, and especially the Black business owners. Talk about how this is for anyone actually, talk about how the pandemic has impacted small Black business owners and the policies that were put into place. Do you think they were effective, and what do you think should happen moving forward?
So I'm going to start first by saying, unless my colleagues can correct me, I don't recall any policies being put in place to support Black businesses. And that was the problem. There were policies put in place to support small businesses, of which minority businesses and Black businesses are considered. But by the time it got to support necessarily for Black businesses, our firms were shut out of that support. So when you look at the data has told us that since May, over 40% of Black businesses have gone out of operation. And of that 40%, over 60% do not know if they can even come back and start their operations once we get through this pandemic crisis. Those are staggering numbers. And we have to make sure that we have processes in place to help position these firms to remain solvent, sustainable, and pillars within their communities. And I think that's where we have the opportunity. When you look at organizations such as RON's, U.S. Black Chambers, NMSDC, we're doubling down and putting in place resources and accountability, particularly for corporate America, to step up their actions and have more inclusion and transparency around opportunities within their supply chain. So that's what I think we're going to have to really focus on if we want our businesses to be sustainable and get through this recovery through the U.S.
Thank you. Anyone can jump in. I really want this to be a conversation, so whoever wants to jump in next definitely can.
Sure. I had the opportunity to sit at the table when the legislation was being created, and there's 700 plus pages of documentation related to this stimulus package. And so your first question was really about the pandemic and the impact it has had on Black businesses. And I say it's really a trifecta. The first leg of that trifecta was our lives related to the pandemic, the virus itself. We died more so than any other community. We were impacted more so than any other community based upon our living conditions, based upon where we worked, based upon us being called essential workers versus being able to have the flexibility of working at home. The second leg, as Adrienne discussed, was really the stimulus package itself. And if you looked at the two packages, the first one was the payroll protection plan. And I say that it excluded us from the jump, just off the name. Of the 2.6 million Black-owned businesses that we own and operate across the country, 2.5 million have no payroll. They have no employees, but yet we have contractors, subcontractors, family members, cash and carry businesses, but they weren't able to participate in that payroll protection plan. The other half of that stimulus package was really an idle loan, which really probably was geared more towards our community, but the word loan had our community saying, I didn't create this pandemic. I don't want to take a loan out at such a high interest rate for Black business owners that now I'm going to have to decide, what am I going to do in the future? We never heard, is this going to be a month pandemic, 6 months pandemic, 12 months pandemic? And so how do I determine how long I should take out a loan? How large should the loan be? There was really no communication, and we know that of the $349 billion that was created for the stimulus package on a Friday afternoon, by that Saturday, $250 billion was given to 50 publicly traded white firms. No questions asked about, do you need the payroll protection plan? Are your employees going to be let go? Have you suffered revenue losses? Are you in need of additional funds? They made the announcement on Friday. By Saturday, the majority of the money was gone, leaving all of the rest of the small businesses owners to have to now go out and compete. And then the third leg of that trifecta was the murder of George Floyd. And we saw it across the country. Everyone saw it. And we had to say as a collective, since they don't see our lives as being valuable, we had to come up with our own campaign saying Black Lives Matter. Those three impacts have enforced us to now say, one, an election is extremely important, policy is extremely important, and during this next stimulus package, they've got to make sure that the communities that were impacted the most are the communities that get the most opportunities, from contracts to insurance to revenue, and most importantly, funding. In order for us to have a good community going forward, we're going to need those four things, and I think it really does start with good policy.
I'd love to jump in on what Ron is saying, because in addition to everything that he and Adrienne have each said, the legislation that came down did not have a requirement in it that there be an allocation of that funding that go to Black-owned businesses, right? And the absence of that requirement is really important, because what we know from history and otherwise in this country is that when you don't specifically say, and there needs to be something going to Black-owned and to women-owned and started businesses, it doesn't go there. That's one issue. Another issue is in terms of how the package was marketed. And Ron alluded to this a little bit. You know, it's called the payroll protection. You know, so that in and of itself is the kind of thing that makes a lot of us stand back. But it's further than that, right? Because, you know, were we using the proper means of communicating to and going to where Black business owners may be and are, which is not all the same places where, you know, white business owners necessarily are all the time, and making sure that people had the information, or that they had access to the information, right? So for example, not all of us are on, I mean, I'm on MSNBC right now in the background, waiting for more results to come in, but not all of us are on MSNBC, CNN, you know, like all of these different programs all day long. And a lot of us cannot afford to be, quite frankly. Not all of us are reading or subscribing to New York Times, Wall Street Journal, each of these different newspapers. You know, we get information in a variety of different ways. So in a hyper disaggregated, disintermediated media environment, there have to be more ways of finding to get information to and to market that information so that people can participate and decide for themselves. And so it's not just, you know, sometimes people will say things like, well, you know, the Black business owners just didn't apply. Really? Have you asked the question why we didn't apply? Did we know about it? Did we have access to the technical assistance? Did we have access to the information? We may not have necessarily had access to the information in a timely manner. if you don't have access to this kind of information in a timely manner, and there's a limited pool of funds that are going to be going out. And also when you don't have sophisticated legal and accounting teams, such as the white publicly owned corporations that Ron was alluding to previously, when you don't have, those very, very sophisticated teams, and most of us, I would like to think of myself as being relatively sophisticated. I'm well educated, I have a good, good professional background, but I don't have access, and I cannot afford to spend, my business cannot afford to spend, $2,400, $3,000 an hour on the best legal and accounting minds. Like I wouldn't have a business if I did that, quite frankly. So, I'm not necessarily getting the same kind of information or having like a team of people who's like saying, hey, Binta, you need to be thinking about this, this, and this. I'm trying to figure that out on my own while at the same time saving my business and then growing my business. So, I mean, these are some of the things, when we talk about, the policy and COVID that are really, really important to think about in the future, because we have to fix it in the future. And we also
let me address two of the statements that you made. The first one was, this was a race neutral policy. And let me explain why. If you remember when COVID hit, it was our president then that came out and called it the China virus. And when we all had the opportunity to go, all of our collective communities, it was the Asian community that was out front saying they needed the funds. I'm old enough to remember the riots that happened in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, when that happened, it was the Asian community that was in the front of the line. Even though it happened in the cities and in the communities that we lived in, they got the funding because they had the loudest voice. We collectively, the Black community, Black business community, NMSDC, Hispanic Chamber said, no. If anybody's gonna get some funding first, it's gonna be Black people. And because of the fact that we had a difference of opinion, we said, fine, then we'll make it race neutral, because nobody's gonna get in front of Black folk, because we've been facing a pandemic for hundreds of years, not just weeks or months. And so, yes, it was race neutral. The second one, in reference to we didn't have the education and the resources, that's why you have nonprofits like the National Minority Supplier Development Council and the USBC. That's what we do 24/7. We make sure that we are on Capitol Hill in our corporate offices, making sure that we are advocating to get the information. It's the small business responsibility to make sure that they have relationships with the organizations that are carrying the water for our members so that you don't have to. I was a small business owner for a long time, so I know the challenges of working in a business versus working on a business. But what's critical is that you gotta make sure that your business is a member of an organization that is working on it for you as it relates to policy, as it relates to access to capital, because we would have told you early on, banks are getting paid based on the size of the loan.
Right.
So your small business, my small organization, we were always going to be at the end of the line, not because of discriminatory practices, but it was because of based on the fees and how they got paid. So then we turned around and said, okay, well, great. We have relationships with CDFIs, with Black-owned banks. Let's go call in our friends. And then the third thing, many of you tech firms got it all twisted. You guys said, well, great, just send me a check. Download it to my phone right now. We're saying no, because this isn't going to be the last pandemic. One of the things that we discuss is about mergers and acquisitions. We lost 40% of our businesses, true, but they all had clients, customers, employees, revenue. So it's now important to us to make sure that we don't let that revenue leave our communities. So that means we gotta start doing mergers and acquisitions. And so you know what that means? I gotta have a relationship with a bank. My banker is going to have to understand, I need additional dollars to be able to buy this firm, or to make sure that I have the additional capital that I need to be able to make the payroll for this company that I'm bringing on, or for my next opportunity. I think we have heard, and we know it, that there's discrimination in banking, no question about it, but that should not stop us from going to the banks that want our business. And those banks are going to be the banks that get us through this next wave and this next emergency. And so, yes, we have our challenges, but you have organizations on this call that are there to make sure that we have the resources, the information that all of our businesses need across the country.
No,
And I'm
Ron.
sorry, I had to jump in.
No, I appreciate that. Ron, I actually have a question for you regarding that, because we have a lot of Black business owners that aren't made aware of the organizations like ours that are all out there. How do we meet the people where they're at? Because obviously there's a disconnect. So some of the things that I've been thinking of is ways to meet Black business owners where they are where they are at. I'm talking about barbershops, salons, etc. Like, where do we congregate and spend most of our time? Churches even, and just making folks aware of these initiatives that are out there and the education piece to it, so that they know that they need to get involved in these ways, and we can become more organized in that way as well.
Great
Marcus,
question.
if I could jump in there, because I think that's a very valid point. I think Ron alluded to this earlier. That's why these types of sessions are so critically important, because if we don't push the information out there, a lot of our businesses don't know where to get the information. So one of the things that we struggle with is, for instance, when we talk about what happened with the PPP funding, we took a step back at NMSDC and quickly realized the cavalry was not coming. We had to take care of ourselves. What most businesses don't understand is that NMSDC has its own funding arm. We are a CDFI. So we created our own ability to provide PPP loans and provide resources to those businesses that needed it, and that technical assistance that was so critically important to help them get through the process. But we've got to find ways to push this information out. Ryan said it earlier, we've got to collaborate, because there are businesses within his organization that probably need exposure to NMSDC and types of organizations that we are, and our firms and our corporate members also need to know that there is a U.S. Black Chamber that has all these chambers around the country that can reach some of those that are, you know, on the street that we can't get to. That's why this collaboration is so critically important for us, to make sure that we know what each other's doing and how we can help each other reach our members collectively.
Marcus,
I'm just going to put this out there as a suggestion, because it is hard to reach people today. You know, like as a co-founder of the Black Music Action Coalition, which is quite frankly, ultimately, yes, we're music, but ultimately a bunch of small owned businesses. But we're also, you know, we're savvy at building movements out of a song, right? So, and around a song. So I think that, you know, I'm just going to put it out here to both of your organizations. Let's work together so that we can find more ways of getting this out to more folks. You know, like if it's something where I can disseminate it to people's attorneys and to their business managers so that they understand, because they don't understand. And they're not sharing the information. Another thing I think is really critically important in the Black community is that, and this is us talking to us right now, you know, like I wouldn't necessarily say this in other settings, but we have to get past and move past the stigma of asking one another for help when we need it. You know, we have to get past the stigma associated with saying, hey, my business is not going well. Haven't earned revenue in 7 months. Thank you, COVID. Like, we need to actually be okay with saying these things, because when we aren't okay with saying these things, to Ron's point, how do you form a merger? How do you acquire another company? How do you get yourself set up to be acquired? If you're not saying to somebody or saying to other people that here's what's going on with my business, I do have valuable assets, but I can't generate revenue off of those assets right now because of these other constraints. Excuse me, maybe you can, you know, maybe you are in a position where you can help carry the water, or maybe you can help me with a float to revenue, you know, which is basically what all of us need right now these days. So, but the mental habit of not being able to articulate or not wanting to share, and I've had this conversation with so many people over the past months, not being able to share, like, hey, my business is down, it's not going that great. It's really funny to me in the music business, because like I can look at anybody and say, I know your business isn't going well, like we don't have live. Like that's where all of our revenue is. Like
I think most small business owners have a sense of ego. Thus the reason that they created their own vision, because they did not want to create wealth for someone else.
Right.
And that's a great thing. I think also small business owners have this sense of, I can conquer all things. I think as Black people, we have this sense of faith that if I pray hard enough, I work hard enough, I invest my own capital, then I will continue to be successful. 90% of small businesses fail. No questions about it. And when you add on top of that, Black businesses that don't have the resources that they need to have sustainability, especially during turbulent times like that, there's no reason for us to be concerned about us going out of business. And to answer your question, Marcus, you can go to buyblack.us, and it's a platform for all Black-owned businesses across the country to network with each other. And the reason why I say that, I love what Adrienne does at NMSDC. They certify businesses to say, yes, you are who you say you are. But right now in America, beside NMSDC and a government program called the AA program, which is extremely expensive, cumbersome, and takes a long time, and most businesses don't need to be in that program, you can't tell me you're Black-owned right now. And when we go to corporate America and we say, corporate America, we want you to increase your spend with Black firms, they say, great, Ron, our supplier diversity numbers are wonderful. And I'm saying, no, it ain't about supplier diversity. I need you to increase your Black spend, and not just at the top level, but I need to see second tier, third tier. I need to see some subcontracts based upon them being Black. Even if it's, I need to see an attorney from a music industry. It's hard to find you unless I go to a specific portal for that industry. We want to create a portal for all Black industries, all Black-owned businesses, so that we can find each other, we can support each other, and we can most definitely present you to NMSDC to get certified to do business with corporate America. You can come to us to do business with government, and most importantly, we can do business with each other. Many times we talk about the $1 trillion that Black folk have to spend. That's usually not Black folk talking about that. That's usually corporate America saying, Black folk have $1 trillion to spend. How do we market to them to ensure that we get our piece of that pie? We just got to change the conversation and say, how do we keep that in our communities?
I want to get back to policy for a bit. I know you were always talking about some of the challenges and things that are lacking with this last stimulus package. What do you want to see Congress do next, particularly when it comes to Black small businesses? What, if you could help them write the legislation, what will you put in there?
So
Adrienne,
I'm going
you
to
wanna
jump
go
in and say
first?
this first.
Adrienne, you want to go first?
Sure, because I think this is really critical. And again, I'm going to be very candid. We need the federal government to understand that there are specific issues that impact the Black community that do not impact other small businesses. That is the first step. When we were working with senior White House officials as they were developing the first round of the stimulus funding, one of the key challenges that we had is for them to even acknowledge the subset of Black businesses and the issues and challenges that affect them. So we were told very directly that to have something specific for minority or Black businesses is considered discriminatory. That is not discriminatory. We understand there are a set of unique challenges that our businesses face that data supports and is empirical information that's available. Therefore, I think someone said this earlier in the call, we need to put the resources where those most vulnerable businesses are. And that is the Black business community. So I think as we talk about what needs to come next, there needs to be specific legislation and policies developed that address the issues in the Black business community. That's where I would start.
I think transparency and data is extremely important. In the previous administration, the SBA could tell you our goal is 23% spend with small minority-owned businesses. Right now, we can't tell you how much the government spends with minority and definitely not Black-owned businesses. The data is not there. You heard earlier that we lost 40 to 41% of our Black-owned businesses. The U.S. Black Chamber was screaming as loud as we could early on, hey guys, we're gonna lose 35 to 40% of our businesses. And no one wanted to hear it because it was an emotional plea, like, please give us some help. No one heard it until the Federal Reserve came out and said, guess what? The Black community lost 41% of their businesses. Now everybody was in an uproar like, oh my God, what can we do? We need to start with clear data and transparency so that we can now know what the benchmark is going forward. Right now, there's no accountability of what they spend, and what doesn't get measured does not get acted upon. The second thing, the 8A program, I think it definitely needs to be expanded. Right now, it's a 9-year program. I think from Black people's perspective, just Black businesses, it could be increased to 20 to 25 years. That is how you create generational wealth. If you look at the Black Enterprise Top 100 list, there's always firms that do great business with the government, and after 9 years, they disappear because they have to transition out of the 8A program and let someone else in. I think that could be expanded. It would create wealth. And then the third thing, and you guys have heard me say this, the government should pay its people on time. It makes no sense to me that you get a federal government contract January 1st and don't get paid till June 15th. Now I got to go get a high interest rate loan just to carry the float of the federal government. The federal government under the last administration under Obama had a prompt pay program, which said, once I invoice you, you got to pay me within 15 days. Now, as was discussed by one of our panelists, I can actually carry my own float. I can actually carry my own payroll. I don't have to go get a twice the rate interest loan as my white peer just to make sure that I can continue to do work for the federal government. So I think transparency, I think 8A program, I think prompt pay are some of the things that we'd love to be able to see immediately in the first 100 days in reference to policy coming out of this next administration.
You know, I strongly second everything that I've just heard. I'd like to extend speeding up pay beyond government contracting, because that's not just an issue, unfortunately and sadly, with government pay. It, you know, like a lot of small Black businesses suffer because, you know, we might be contracting, for example, with, you know, publicly held major record labels or publishers. They don't necessarily pay net 30. Sometimes they pay net 60, net 90. But people, you know, who are trying to pay their rent need to be paid net today. You know, so that needs to be tightened up a lot. Something else which I'd like to see, and this is more of a policy, this is definitely a policy issue, is better financing and funding of Black-owned banks, and the creation of more CDFIs and credit unions in the places where Black businesses are most likely to be, but keeping in mind that we are not monolithic and not all of us are in those places where we are most likely to be. Sometimes we choose, and especially now with COVID, a lot of folks are choosing to be wherever they want to be because, you know, we're not necessarily getting together in person in the same ways. And so, but just making sure that these banks and these institutions are well funded. That's not to say that the burden should be on, or well capitalized. That's not to say that the burden should, so that they can make more loans, which is why I make that point. And that's not to say that the burden should be on Black-owned banks and Black banking institutions, financial institutions, to provide capital to Black businesses, because I actually don't believe that at all. I think that the large banks, with whom it can sometimes be very, very difficult for us to form solid relationships until we are generating that much revenue on a consistent annual basis. I think that there need to be, you know, like in the same way that the large banks have gotten really savvy at saying, you know, you have an entry point. So for example, when I practiced law, and the minute that I made partner in my law firm, every bank reached out to me and said, we have a special program for lawyers who have just made partner, who are showing that they're likely to make partner. And so I immediately went into private banking and had a whole bunch of services that weren't, and I was like, wow. So this is why all of these benefits and advantages going to me just because I made partner in a law firm, these are the advantages that I needed, you know, 5 years ago. You know, so trying to figure out a way to create programs that through the banks that allow more people to participate in these kinds of advantages, which exist. And I know why they do it. You know, like I know why they do it. But the thing is that it means that oftentimes the people who are in the greatest need, the businesses that are in the greatest need, don't have the same access, and so they're disadvantaged. And so if there's a policy intervention that could occur there, I don't want to take anything away from anybody. All I want to do is make it more available to more people. Something like that, I think, would be deeply meaningful. I mean, we really need to be thinking through, you know, our banking system and the structural racism that is baked into our banking system.
The only thing I wanted to add, piggybacking off of what Ron said around transparency and the policies being created, are understanding the language or the fluff language that are in the policies as well. I think that that is a big piece that we need to start to sift through as Black folks, is that oftentimes there's a lot of code language in there that may look appealing at the surface level, but when you actually dig deeper, it actually is excluding us. And so being able to educate and help Black business owners understand that will also help out.
Something else I want to jump in and say before we move on to the next topic is that, you know, when we think about what needs to come next and what type of ongoing support is needed, we saw a lot of companies come out over these last 4 or 5 months or so with making these strong declarations to support Black businesses, right? What we want to ensure is that there is action that is backed up to those statements. A lot of big checks were written. We need more than just those big checks, though. We need deliberate intentions around more economic inclusion for Black businesses. And that is, going back to the point Ron made earlier, the transparency, not just for what they're spending today, but what they're going to spend, what those opportunities are for spend. How do we understand where there are opportunities for Black businesses, minority businesses to get exposure to the opportunities within the corporate supply chain, holding them on the carpet for that, and being transparent about what they're actually spending and the accountability that comes in place with that $1 trillion spend that they talk about. We want to make sure that that money is coming to the Black community and staying in our communities.
You bring up a really interesting point. I was just thinking about that. This summer, after the death of George Floyd, there was this uprising and all of these various organizations saying their support for Black-owned businesses. But I think the data is showing that while there's some checks have been written, it hasn't really made that big of an impact. And I don't think we've seen that quite yet. And even before, we know the challenges of Black-owned businesses getting funding. Earlier, you were talking about banking, but one of the things we haven't really talked about quite yet is venture capital dollars. And as an entrepreneur myself, I didn't know until I started doing research about the challenges that not only Black people, but Black women face when getting access to capital. For Black people, it's 1%. For Black women, it's 0.2% when it comes to VC dollars. What should policy makers be doing when it comes to making sure that we're getting a bigger piece of that pie beyond the banking?
You know, when a bunch of companies, this is part of the reason why the Black Music Action Coalition formed, because in the record business, the lion's share of revenues is derived from Black music, and there are gross inequities in the record business, not just in terms of investment, but in terms of who's an executive, who's not an executive, like how people are paid, and so on down, and so on and so on and so on. All of these companies came out immediately and said $100 million here, $100 million there, $25 million there. This is the transparency point. It is not clear where and how that money has been spent. And so I think that a necessary policy intervention is, if you're going to make a public statement saying that you're going to spend $100 million, then you need to tell us where you're spending it, how you're spending it. Because I see no evidence that you know, half $500 million that was put together, at least in that industry, has actually gone back to the Black community. I see zero evidence of that. Yeah, you know, like there might have been some civil rights organizations that really benefited from it, which is great. I'm happy that the civil rights organizations are getting money to fund their operations. But I also do not and cannot possibly believe that our civil rights organizations necessarily need $500 million to do what they've been doing. But you know who does need that money? Maybe they do, Ron, I don't know.
I was going to say, I don't want to, and let me say this, a couple of things. First off, yes, there was a lot of checks written. A lot of that money came from those 50 publicly traded companies that got that $250 billion that did not want the heat, right? And so they said, let me write a check for $1 million or $10 million. It wasn't their money in the first place. It was taxpayers' money that they were now saying, here's a rebate check to the civil rights organizations to make sure that we don't get the heat, because we're going to say we look good because we wrote a big check, one. Two, if you go to our Facebook page, I'm sorry, our social media pages right now, we have a metric that actually measures all of the commitments that were made. So when JP Morgan Chase came out and said, hey, we're going to do $30 billion, we put it down. And we said, where's it going? And we're tracking it by month. Who's getting the dollars? So there's some accountability there as well. And then third, most of that money that we received, civil rights groups, NMSDC, it was all earmarked. So we don't get to keep that money. They told you exactly, hey, we want these dollars to go to loans for small businesses that are in the music industry, that are CEOs by a Black female that lives in this zip code that has this many employees. And so we got the dollars, but it's going to be trickled to you based upon their criteria. Now, many of us gave proposals to corporate America and said, hey, because corporate America, what typically happens is someone will say, hey, we got $1 million and we wanted to give it to small business owners. So small business owners apply to these applications and we will figure out which businesses get it. And whomever is the best companies that can reply to all those various applications around the country, those are the first that are getting them funding. They may not necessarily be the ones that need it the most, but as you discussed before, they have an infrastructure, they got a boilerplate proposal that they're getting in and they're getting funded. And we see those companies, and I'm not mad at that. But there's a lot of companies around the country that are Black owned that really need the dollars that don't have the infrastructure to be able to apply. And so organizations like the U.S. Black Chamber, NMSDC, we receive the dollars, and because we have chambers and relationships across the country, we then turn around and say, okay, local chamber, local NMSDC office, we know you know the businesses on the ground. We now need you to fund those businesses that need the businesses the first. And then the second piece of that, it ain't about just the money, right? Because I can give a lot of small business owners funding and they still go out of business because they didn't have the technical assistance, the relationships, and the infrastructure. I don't care how much money corporate America writes us. We still have to build good businesses so that we can build good infrastructure so that we can continue to grow. I'll say this. This election has showed us a couple of things. One, the current administration is really about the economy and unemployment. We know that Black people were the highest unemployed people in the country. And the reason being is because we know that we lost more of our businesses than any other business community. Black people hire Black people. So if you want to see our communities grow and our Black people get hired, then make sure you fund the Black businesses that need the money so that they can get the technical assistance that they need, so that they can do the things that they need to be able to grow and continue to hire and prosper our communities.
Binta, did you want to finish your thought? And also, I am really curious to hear, how did you get funding to start your business? Because we know the challenges that Black women in general face when it comes to funding.
So I'm gonna answer both those questions. So first, I'm really glad to be on this panel with everybody, but especially with Ron and Adrienne, because I'm about to become y'all's best friend. And you're already my best friend.
I don't know, Adrienne. I got a whole lot of best friends right about now.
We'll take it. Come on, Binta.
This is the second time I've been on a panel with Ron, and every time I'm on a panel with you, I have a better understanding of the mistake I've made and others like me have made by not tapping into USBC sooner. And so I feel like God works in incredibly mysterious ways. I didn't want to do a panel so quickly after the election on Tuesday. I was like, no, I'm tired. I've been talking for 6 months. But here I am, I'm doing it, and I'm getting some good education. So I'm really grateful and glad about that. The last thing that I was going to just say is that, you know, in terms of like the private money that's out there, you know, and this ties into your question, how did I get started? You know, well, I was very fortunate for a couple of different reasons. I helped to take a company public, so I had a little bit of cash lying around in my bank account. I was a relatively successful corporate lawyer, so I had a little bit of savings associated with that. But I also had a major disadvantage, which is that I have a underlying life-threatening disease, which, you know, cost me a lot of money. And so because of that, and because I was really, really worried, I have sickle cell disease. And because I was really worried about what it would mean for me to be an entrepreneur who has to spend an extraordinary amount of money every year to be what my medical team calls a highly functioning sickle cell disease patient. You know, I was like, this is, you know, like my savings is good, but it's not really that good. And it's especially not good if I have a massive medical event, of which I've had several. So, you know, I fortunately, you know, like because of my prior career had built up, to Ron's point, had built up some outstanding relationships with people, have a lot of close friends, you know, and so I did a combination of bootstrapping and raising angel money. Now, here's the issue, and here's the thing that I ran into, which is that, you know, you have to have enough runway in order to really make it work. I didn't necessarily, and I had decent runway, but the thing that I didn't count on was people behaving badly. And what I mean by that is people who, you know, you generate a substantial amount of revenue, you generate a substantial amount of money, and they don't pay you. Or you put money behind something as part of growing your business, and you're not reimbursed or compensated. And so the thing that I hadn't really well planned for was the amount that I would need to pay in legal fees, or whether or not I should even be working with attorneys and like to go after some of the folks who owed money. You know, like these are questions that I, you know, had to wrestle with. You know, so it's difficult. And I would say even now, you know, like I'm actually in a process of relaunching my business, Omalilly Projects, which is got a variety of different elements to it. It's all very focused, but there are different elements in terms of the phases as I think about it over the course of the next 5 to 7 years. And the second phase is going to require a substantial capital infusion. And so I think that, you know, I'm definitely smarter than I was 7 years ago when I first got started doing this. I hope that I have much better relationships, but the practical reality is that it's still very, very difficult. The one mistake, you know, and this is, you know, advice for, you know, any young Black person or old Black person, you know, who's watching this, any female, you know, watching this, is that you have to be very, very careful about the devils of bitterness and entitlement and feeling put upon. And what do I mean by that? It can become really easy to sit around and say, if I were a white dude with the same exact pedigree and this same track record, I would have raised $10 million, $50 million, just off of my whiteness. It can be really easy to sit around and look at that and to feel really put upon because it's not coming to you that same way. We could also take that and we could say, listen, because things that don't come to us easily, I'm going to work that much harder. I'm going to develop relationships in this place and that place and the other place. And I'm not saying that it's easy because it's really difficult, but it's a mistake, and it becomes a distraction for us when we start becoming bitter about it. You know, like when you're building your own business, Black or white, male or female, it is like the greatest freedom and the greatest joy because you have the ability to be the captain of your own ship. You have the ability to figure out how to grow something from nothing. And then if you're successful, when you're successful, the ability to say, I did that. And so I see a lot of people, you know, I gave a talk at one of the top business schools earlier this year, and they were all, and I was surprised because like when I say top business school, this was Harvard. Like I was surprised by the number of students in the class who were feeling, Black students in the talk, who were feeling really put upon. And I'm like, you do realize that you're at HBS, you know, you're at Harvard. Like you do realize, like, don't worry, like, yeah, it might be easier for your classmate, your section mate. Let them fight their own battles. Turn what is difficult for us into strength. And that's something that I think that we as Black people have oftentimes done very, very well. And I think it's, you know, I keep seeing all these pundits and different people say like, oh, wow, it's amazing that Black people still vote after all we've put them through. Well, I have other thoughts about that line of thinking, which is stop putting us through all of that. you know, like stop being racist. Like that would be a good thing. But here's the thing: is that we have always been good at taking our frustration and our disadvantages and turning them into strengths and sources of power. And so when it comes to fundraising, we got to realize that we're going to have to look at every single avenue, for raising capital. We're going to have to look at every single relationship that we can possibly build. We're going to have to be patient, and we're going to have to be better informed than everybody else. That is not something to be bitter about. That's what makes our businesses more successful at the end of the day. It's why when we as Black people really put our minds to doing stuff, we blow it out of the park because we know what we're up against. And so I think that when it comes to raising money, it's really about not worrying about how hard it is and doing everything you can to be better prepared than you think you need to be, so that you can get the resources you can, because they are out there, and Black people do succeed, so we can't get so mired down in the statistics that we forget and that we give up.
Thank you for that, Binta. I want to wrap things up and end it with Marcus. I know that you've had corporate contracts, a bit of a different type of path. If you can briefly talk about that, and then we can wrap up the conversation with that.
Yeah, so I started my consultancy business during the middle of the pandemic, and I quit my full-time to do that. And the reason being is because while I was working in my full-time, I was cultivating relationships with enterprise organizations, testing out my business model, and it got to a point that it was very fruitful. So I decided to just focus on that full time. And honestly, it's been over the past 10 years that all of these enterprise type organizations that I've been interacting with, just making sure that I build those relationships up so that they understand that whatever I'm doing, that I would like them to try out my services. Oftentimes just start out for free just to see if there's a model there or a market for me to actually disrupt. So that's been my model. And now I take that and help Black businesses kind of get into those areas and show them how to build those relationships and how to build those revenue strategies out that will last, 3-5 years, et cetera.
Thank you for that. Binta, Adrienne, Ron, Marcus, this has been a really amazing conversation. Of course, we can't get all to it because everyone's so dynamic and very passionate about this, but I'm going to give this back to Renee.
Thanks, DeShuna. And I want to thank all of our panelists here today. This discussion was super amazing, super timely. And personally, I feel like we have to welcome you all back for a part 2, especially when we figure out what happens to our wonderful democracy here. So from all of us here at Reimagine Main Street, we want to say thank you, and thank you to all of our panelists and our amazing moderator for today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Stay hopeful, everybody.
Yay.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Appreciate
All right.
it. This was a great
Good to see you, Adrienne.
You too, Ron.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Bye.